This is National Cannabis Radio. Brought to you by the National Cannabis Coalition.
Dreamed about a reefer 5 feet long, mighty immense but not too strong. You'll be high but not for long if you's a viper.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Viper Hour, America's Reefer Jazz Culture. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. The music you're listening to there is Bob Howard and his boys. The song is If You're a Viper. Theme song for our Viper Hour. Of course, Viper meaning the sound pot smokers make when they're smoking a joint. If you get my drift there, Daddy-o. Anyway, there's a line at the beginning of that song, a mighty Mezz but not too strong, that refers to the subject of tonight's Viper Hour. We're going to go into in-depth look at the history of reefer jazz and one man who made a lot of it possible, at least the first part of that phrase, the reefer part. Milton Mezz Mezzrow will be the subject of discussion on today's Viper Hour. Before we get to Mezz, we're also going to be playing some Cab Calloway. Of course, Cab Calloway, a big favorite here at the Viper Hour. We've also got our chat room available at ncr420.com. Enjoy some Bob Howard here for a moment.
Everything is dandy. Just truck on down to the candy store. Blow your top on peppermint candy. Then you know your body is sand. You don't care if you don't pay rent. The sky is high and so am I. Whoa, if you're a viper.
That's right, and we're all Vipers here at the Viper Hour. And the reason we are doing this show, bringing it back, of course, the original Viper Hour was created by our good friend Cannabob, and we are hoping he comes back sometime soon and gives us more of the Viper Hour. But until then, I have resurrected it to keep it going because I think this part of our culture is very important to remember, that our reefer culture goes back to the early 1900s, at least in this music. So from time to time, we're going to be bringing you these Viper Hours to give you a look at the early American 20th century jazz and blues that featured many artists who put the drug scene into their lyrics. The people they knew every day who were the Vipers, the people who were the Cokies, and the various terms that they had for drug use at the time, kicking the gong around if they were using opium and so forth. So we will bring that to you in more education. And before we get to more of the Viper Hour, we want to remind you that we are presented to you on National Cannabis Radio. You can learn more about our schedule and replays at ncr420.com. And please help us out. Help us keep this on the air. You can text Russ to 420-420 if you'd like to contribute. And we will keep bringing you this great American music, this reefer jazz to you here on the Viper Hour. Let's turn things over to Cab Calloway. This is the new Viper Hour and Cab Calloway with Smokin' Reefers.
Must all depend on marijuana. Oh, we once began it, and you're sure to end on marijuana. It's the kind of stuff all the dreams are made of. It's the thing that white folks are afraid of. Up in Harlem we go, a marijuana jam, smoking reefer to puff away, yeah, the misery. Go away, go away, go away, misery. Blow, blow away, blow away. Smoking reefer to get beyond the worrying. Go away, worrying. Blow, blow away, blow away. Must wake up and work in the morning. Must get by the brooding at night. You can change this world you were born in, but I declare you can be walking on air. Smoking reefer. You hear the angels sing away, helping you to fling away your worrying and your troubles and care.
Cab Calloway, Smokin' Reefers. Follow up with a song that kind of segues into our Mezz Mezzrow feature tonight. This is Cab Calloway with the Reefer Man.
Man, what's the matter with that cat there?
Must be full of reefer.
Full of reefers?
Yeah, man.
Mean that cat's high?
Sailing.
Sailing?
Sailing lightly.
Get away from here. Man, is that the reefer man?
That's the reefer, man.
I believe he's losing his mind.
I think he's lost his mind.
Reefer man.
Reefer man.
Have you ever met that funny reefer man?
Reefer man.
If he says he swam to China and sell you South Carolina, then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
Reefer man.
Have you ever met funny reefer man?
Reefer man.
Have you ever met funny reefer man?
Reefer man.
If he says he walks the ocean anytime he takes a notion, then you know you're talking to the reefer man.
Reefer man.
Then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
Reefer man.
Have you ever met fun reefer man?
Reefer man.
Have you ever met a funny reefer man?
Reefer man.
If he takes a sudden mania wants to give you Pennsylvania, then you know you're talking to the Reefer Man. You ever met a funny Reefer Man? Have you ever met a funny Reefer Man? If he says Wall Street is Hispanic, cause he won't sell the Atlantic, then you know you're talking to that Reefer Man.
Oh, yeah, that's the Reefer Man, Cab Calloway and his orchestra. And, you know, when they're talking about the Reefer Man, you're talking about the guy. You know, these days we call him the guy. You got to get your hookup, so to speak. You got to find that guy who's got the reefers. And when we look back at the Harlem jazz scene of the 1930s and 1940s, we find that we can trace back a lot of this to one man who, interestingly, was a white boy from Chicago. His name was Milton Mezz Mezzrow, and he seemed to have introduced marijuana to a lot of the Harlem jazz scene. He was born in Chicago in 1899, and Mezzrow was from a family that was, quote, as respectable as a Sunday morning, according to his autobiography. He liked the streets, and so when he was caught in a stolen Studebaker, his family thought reform school would be the solution. While there, he discovered jazz and black people. From then on, I was sticking close to the Negroes, he said, and I was going to learn their music. I was going to be a musician. Being completely untalented, he never did quite become the musician that some of his the people that he hung out with was, but he did bring something else to the Harlem scene. He was first introduced to marijuana in Gary, Indiana in 1924 while listening to jazz by a New Orleans musician. Marijuana was commonplace in New Orleans and had been introduced there around 1910 by sailors from the Caribbean. This again points out how long our marijuana culture goes back. Now, Mezzrow, who was again just an average musician, became an instant fan of marijuana and argued that it improved his playing. Quote, suddenly there wasn't a sour note or a discord in the world that would bother me. I began to preach my millenniums on the horn, leading all the sinners to glory. When he arrived in New York in 1929, he brought his marijuana with him and started peddling it to the musicians. So we're going to get fast forward just a little bit to 1934. Mezz is working in New York, and he's recording this song called Blues in Disguise. 1934, Mezz Mezzrow on the Viper Hour. Mezz Mezzrow, Blues in Disguise, 1934. This is Mezz Mezzrow and his swing band, 1936.
Hey, y'all. Willie, what's this I hear about you mugging?
I'm getting ready to tell you about it now. I's a mugging. I mean I's mugging. I said I's mugging. Bum-bee-bum-bee-bum-bee-bum. I's mugging. I mean I'm mugging. Cause I'm mugging. Bee-bop, 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 bee-bop. I'm getting ready to mug some on the other side.
That's Mezz Mezzrow and his swing band with I's a Muggin' from 1936. And when he means getting ready to go on the other side, well, that was, of course, part one of I's a Muggin'. We're going to play part two of I's a Muggin' in just a little bit. Part two really isn't so much song as it is almost a sobriety test. If these lyrics aren't printed out in front of them while they're playing it, these musicians who pull this off are pretty amazing. So stick around for that. I's a Muggin' Part 2 coming up. That's, of course, because these were pressed onto 78s. You could only get a few minutes worth of a song onto one side. You couldn't record 5, 6, 7-minute songs, so they Part 1 and Part 2 would fit on one side of each side of the 78 RPM record. Of course, as records went to 45s and LPs, we got longer and longer songs, but that's always a challenge when we're programming the Viper Hour, is that most of these songs from the Reefer Jazz era are under 3 minutes long. Now we're going to move on to some more Mezz Mezzrow, and we had just taken his history up to when he had stepped into Harlem in 1929, and soon found himself becoming the most popular man in Harlem, known as the man that hipped the world, the man that made history and took Harlem by storm. Not like most white men in the era, he looked kind of square, wore a suit and a tie, and looked like the uncool uncle. Yet through his influence, by the mid-1930s, marijuana had become so woven into the northern black hipster life that allusions to it are in dozens of jazz tunes, including Reefer Head Woman, A Viper's Moan, The Stuff Is Here and It's Mellow, and more explicit songs like Smoking Reefer that we played earlier. We'll play some of those other songs a little later in the hour as well, just because of the shout out. But more of Mezz Mezzrow, moving on to 1937, the year marijuana was prohibited. He came out with this song, Mezz Mezzrow with his swing band, once again with Hot Club Stomp. We'll follow that up with the Art Hodes Trio featuring Mezz Mezzrow with Mezzin' Around from 1944. You're listening to the Viper Hour, America's Reefer Jazz Culture. That's the Art Hodes Trio. Little Mezz Mezzrow there on the side with Mezzin' Around from 1944. Before that, we heard Mezz Mezzrow with Hot Club Stomp of 1937. Interesting time bracket there from 1937 to 1944 in the life of Mezz Mezzrow. After he became so well known for his marijuana that songs are being written after him, the Mighty Mezz, but not too strong and so forth, he actually got addicted to heroin. When marijuana was made illegal in 1937, a lot of the musicians who had been using marijuana, I don't know about a lot, but some of the musicians, including people like Charlie Parker, turned on to what they called hop, which of course was heroin. They figured, yeah, heroin's illegal, but so is marijuana, and if you're going to get in trouble for something, why not get in trouble for something that gave you more of a high, packed more of a punch, so to speak. So that's where a lot of heroin addiction started in the jazz community, and again, people like Charlie Parker. So 1937, 38, 39, Mezz Mezzrow becomes hooked a little bit on the heroin, on the hop that he was using. In 1940, he was arrested in Flushing Meadows, Long Island, for carrying 40 joints. Now, he was caught with 40 joints, but only 30 joints made it to the court from evidence. So you know what they say, police always have the best weed. A lieutenant from the narcotics squad tried unsuccessfully to get Mezz to rat on some other Harlem pot dealers, but that, of course, Mezz did not rat, and he was sentenced to 1 to 3 years in Rikers Island. This was in 1940. Then in summer of 42, he argued for an early release. The judge told him, if the only trouble is if I let you go, you'll get right out with all the rest of your people and re-elect Roosevelt, President FDR. But Mezz got out, and by 1944, he was recording songs like the Mezzin' Around that we just heard, and songs like this, House Party, from 1945. This is more Mezz Mezzrow on the Viper Hour. Underestimating the influence of Mezz Mezzrow on the Harlem jazz scene. He was known as a sociable type, befriended and played with the likes of Bix Beiderbecke, Bessie Smith, and Louis Armstrong, old Satchmo. Says he smoked weed with many of his musician friends, but does not name them in his book, his 1946 autobiography, Really the Blues. Mezz mentored Gene Krupa, taught him how to tune his drums like Louis Armstrong's drummers. Talked Fats Waller into playing the blues right before Fats cut Ain't Misbehaving, and did some arranging for Louis and convinced him to tour Europe, where he was a huge hit.
Mugging with numbers.
Well, explain it to me, Mezz.
All right. Beginning at 1, start counting upwards. When you reach 7, say When you reach 10, say woof. When you reach any number containing a 7, or any number into which 7 can be divided, say When you reach 20, 30, or any number up to 70 that ends with a 0, say woof woof. All right, boys, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, woof. 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 18, 19, woof, woof, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 29, woof, woof, 31, 32, 33, 34, 36, 38, 39, woof, woof, 41, 43, 44, 45, 46, 48, woof, woof, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 58, 59, woof, woof, 61, 62, 64, 65, 66, 68, 69, woof, woof, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, woof, woof.
Eyes a Muggin' Part 2 from 1936, otherwise known as the toughest song a band would ever have to learn the lyrics to. Oh my, it's almost like a sobriety test. Count by 7s, stop on the ones that have 10s, anything's divisible by what? Oh my goodness. Welcome to the Viper Hour. I'm Radical Russ, and we are featuring the music of Mezz Mezzrow, who was born in 1899. He died in August of 1972, August 5th, so we just passed the date of his death. And one of the things he noted is how his use of marijuana, or as it would be put back then, his first stick of tea, how it affected his playing. This was written in his 1946 autobiography, Really the Blues, where he says, quote, "The first thing I noticed is that I began to hear my saxophone as though it was inside my head. Then I began to feel the vibrations of the reed more pronounced against my lip. I found I was slurring much better and putting just the right feeling into my phrases. I was really coming on. All the notes came easing out of my horn like they'd already been made up, greased and stuffed into the bell, so all I had to do was blow a little and send them on their way, one right after the other, never missing, never behind time, all without an ounce of effort. I began to feel happy and sure of myself. With my loaded horn, I could take all the fist-swinging evil things in the world and bring them together in perfect harmony, spreading peace and joy and relaxation to all the keyed-up and punchy people everywhere. I began to preach my millenniums on my horn, leading all the sinners to glory." End quote. And again, by 1939, he was spreading Louis Armstrong's music all across the jukeboxes of Harlem, and the word soon spread that the white boy known as Mezz had the best mota due to Mezz's Mexican connections. Now, we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but you've got to hear this next song. One of the first references to funky that I can even think of. From 1947, the Mezzrow Beckett Quintet, with a song that's entitled Funky Butt. And we'll talk a little bit about the etymology of the word funky, but I'll show you the video. Funky Butt right there on the record album from King Jazz, recorded in 1947. Funk is a term that, of course, we know from Big Daddy Fink's Funky Roller Rink that we have every Thursday night at 9. But this is Funky Butt from the Mezzrow Beckett Quintet on Authentic Album. Enjoy. gives you some idea what we were talking about with the 78 RPM. That was a song, Funky Butt, from 1947. 5 minutes long. Took the whole 12-inch. This is Mezz Mezzrow's most signature tune.
Good evening, everybody. We're going to play a number that I composed and recorded entitled Really the Blues.
That is the voice of Mezz Mezzrow. This is recorded in 1964. That's the mighty Mezz Mezzrow. With Really the Blues from 1964. Of course, he recorded that song much earlier in his career. And it was the title of his 1946 autobiography as well. Really the Blues, co-written by Barnard Wolfe. I'm sure it's still available out there. I'm Radical Russ. You're listening to the new Viper Hour, a look at America's Reefer jazz culture. And we're going to close out with some other songs from the Reefer jazz era that were mentioned in this piece that we read about Mezz Mezzrow and how his influence brought marijuana to the Reefer jazz culture. Before we get to that, though, I just can't stop without addressing Funky Butt from 1947, that song that we played previously with the Mezzrow-Beckett Quintet. According to the online etymology dictionary, the history of the development of words, the reference of funk being a bad smell dates back to the 1620s from dialectical French, Old French, and Latin, from words that had to do with giving off smoke. But it also says here, in reference to a style of music, funk music, it's first attested in 1959 as a back formation of the word funky. So looking up the word funky on the etymology dictionary says funky was also used by early 20th century white writers in reference to body odor allegedly peculiar to blacks. The word reached wider popularity by 1954. The definition appeared in Time magazine in November of 1954, and in the 1960s acquired a broad slang sense of fine, stylish, or excellent. So with the tune called Funky Butt in 1947, have to wonder what it was that Mezz Mezzrow was referring to. Anyway, let's get to some of the other Reefer jazz tunes. Some of the people that were influenced by Mezz Mezzrow may have even bought a lid or two off of him. We're going to start with the Willie Bryant Orchestra, their tune A Viper's Moan, and we'll follow it up with the Buster Bennett Trio and Reefer Head Woman from 1945. You're listening to the Viper Hour.
The Viper's Moan. I want all y'all to get together and swing me out, because I feel the spirit ringing to me.
pretty hair like an ace. But I love that woman, 'cause there's so much loving on her shape. Now she won't give me back. Well, that's all right, baby, 'cause I really want to stay. You send me more in a minute, then my wife could do all day.
Oh, it's funny how we catch the same lyric. Roland Reverend in the chat room pointed out the "she's got a face like a groundhog" lyric. That's the one I picked up on, too. Hey, if those lyrics sounded a little bit familiar to you, that was the Buster Bennett Trio with Reefer Head Woman from 1945. But, of course, Steven Tyler and Aerosmith did a cover of that song, Reefer Head Woman, so maybe one of these days we'll get that played on one of our rock shows. You're listening to the Viper Hour, the new Viper Hour, America's Reefer Jazz Culture, with Radical Russ Belville. Thanks for joining us here. Earlier we featured some great tunes with Mezz Mezzrow, and last week we had an episode where we featured the work of Louis Armstrong, so check out our archives. Once we get those posted, we'll let you know. So we're going to wind up tonight with some more Reefer Jazz that was mentioned in the Mezz Mezzrow piece. We'll start things off with Cleo Brown, The Stuff Is Here, and It's Mellow. It's from 1935. And then we finish it up with Ella Fitzgerald, When I Get Low, I Get High, one of the few songs that we've got here from Ella Fitzgerald in our library. If you've got any songs that you'd like to hear played on the Viper Hour, if you've got some connection to some old 78s, old Reefer Jazz or Reefer Blues tunes, make sure you send me an email. I'm Russ at radicalruss.com, and we'd love to play these tunes. They're all public domain by now, so we don't worry about copyrights or anything like that, so get the information into us. Got lots of Cab Calloway that we'll be getting on future Viper Hours, and other great Reefer Jazz tunes that you'll love to hear. I'm not going to commit to a specific schedule that we will have these up, but when we get the time to do one, we will do a show right here on National Cannabis Radio. You can follow us at NCR 420 for all the updates and information. Thanks for joining us. I'm Radical Russ, and we will talk to you again on a future Viper Hour. Now turn things over to Cleo Brown, When the Stuff Is Here, and It's Mellow on the new Viper Hour. Good night.
Close the doors, start the party up once more. Hey, hey, let's get gay, 'cause stuff is here. Everybody grab a glass, 'cause the good stuff's about to pass. Hey, hey, let's get gay, 'cause stuff is here. Piano man falls upon his stool, plays that piano like he's nobody's fool. Everybody grab that glass, 'cause the good stuff's about to pass. Hey, hey, let's get gay, 'cause stuff is here. Start the party up once more. Hey, hey, let's get gay, 'cause stuff is here. Everybody grab a glass. The good stuff's about to pass. Hey, hey, let's get gay, 'cause stuff is here. Piano man falls upon his stool. Plays that piano like he's nobody's fool. Everybody grab that glass, 'cause the good stuff's about to pass. Hey, hey, let's get gay, 'cause stuff is here. My fur goes cold, oh Lord, ain't it cold? But I'm not gonna holler, 'cause I still got $1, and when I get low, oh, I get high. My man walked out, now you know that ain't right. Well, he'd better watch out if I meet him tonight. I said when I get low, oh, I get high. All this hard luck in this town has found me. Nobody knows how trouble goes round and round me. Oh, I'm all alone with no one to pet me. But old rocking chair ain't never gonna get me, 'cause when I get low, oh, I get high.
Thanks for joining us for the Viper Hour. I'm Radical Russ.